Welcome to Tell Me More, a bit of a conversation between Pastor Tim Breen and myself about what he presented Sunday from Daniel. My name is Tom Hydeen. I am a ministry assistant here, and I have the honor of working with Tim and the rest of the staff members. So, Tim, you were exploring a very well-known story about the handwriting on the wall, and you went in a little bit of a different direction than usually I hear about that story. But what would you say were some things that didn't make the cut for the sermon?
Good question. But I want to hear first from you what you usually hear sermons about with this particular text.
Usually it's not what you focused on, but it's more of his attitude and his self-confidence and those kind of things, and not other things behind it that you brought out as you looked at some details that I had never thought about.
Yeah. Well, thank you. There's a couple of things that probably didn't make the final cut that would have been interesting to explore. One of them is just this little repeated refrain about Daniel being given a purple robe and a chain of gold. And so there's a little bit of a prefiguring to Jesus with the purple that I could have probably leaned into a little bit. But more importantly, this whole idea of how Belshazzar kept trying to break out the gold, and Daniel would suggest this is the very moment that the gold head gives way to the silver. So there's a little bit of wordplay in the idea of Nebuchadnezzar's statue. The gold is coming to an end, and yet he brings out the gold goblets and the gold treasures and the gold chains, and yet he can't help it from turning silver. So there's a little bit of interesting thing there. I think the main thrust of this story that I would have liked to take on with more time is the comparison between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. And Daniel makes much of that here, like verses 18 through 22, 23, that the real problem with Belshazzar is he doesn't carry the weight of Nebuchadnezzar. He's trying to, but he's always posturing. He's always artificial. He's trying to be something he's not. And we did get to that in some ways, but this really big idea, and it's a complex idea, what does the Bible ultimately think of Nebuchadnezzar? But here it seems to be, well, he's better than Belshazzar, and Belshazzar doesn't match up. So I think that Daniel, if he were here in the room, he'd say, well, Tim, you should have talked a little bit more about that comparison.
I had forgotten that there were so many years between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. And you'd mentioned that Belshazzar seemed to forgot what his great-great-grandfather, or whoever his predecessor was, had gone through. And I must admit, though I enjoy history, the names of those kings I cannot keep in my mind. Right. Who followed who and why that's important. So I appreciate the chart that you put on the screen, and I appreciate the fact that it's rooted in history. It's just not pie in the sky kind of fable stories that have been put together, but can be narrowed down to empires and kings that were lifted up and taken down. And that gives, at least for me, credence that the Bible is something more believable than a myth or a fairy tale.
Right, I agree.
So thank you for those names that I have already forgotten. I couldn't really pronounce them either. Well, evil, no, that was one of the names, wasn't it?
Evil Merodach.
Yeah, so
it's even worse if you just try to transliterate from the Aramaic. The words like Evil Merodach or Amel Marduk are just two attempts to try to transliterate very strong and weird runs of consonants in Aramaic. And there were a number of people that kind of spanned that gap. Again, we're not sure of the exact time gap because we don't know securely the date of Daniel chapter 4 and Nebuchadnezzar with the 7 times in the field. But some scholars would say it's probably in the area of about 25 years. If you add together the reigns of these successors, it's something short of that. But we have to assume that Daniel's prophecy of Nebuchadnezzar's restoration did allow Nebuchadnezzar to have a few more years on the throne before his death in 562. So we're talking about the span from about 562 to 529 is 33 years. So we're just ballparking it at about a quarter of a century. But I mean, the main reason for talking about those individuals, Labashi Marduk and Neriglissar and folks like that, is not only to anchor this in history, but it's also to talk about perhaps Belshazzar's concern about the duration of his time on the throne too, because each of these individuals had a very, very short stay on the throne, especially relative to Nebuchadnezzar, who spent decades ruling over the Neo-Babylonian Empire.
How curious that he's talking on the day, wondering about the length of his throne, being king, and that was it.
That was it.
That was it. You did mention about it being, much of Daniel is about the pride issue. Mm-hmm. And we hear a lot about pride. Some of us wrestle with pride. And can you help me figure out the difference between pride over and against just self-confidence or character strength? There's got to be, God gives us with leadership and with abilities to do things, but where's that line? Where's that when do we step over that line?
Yeah. Well, I'll offer kind of a theological answer and then maybe a practical answer. The theological answer is confidence becomes something poisonous, something deadly, when we refuse to acknowledge that all the good things we have, our abilities, our capacities, positions, come from God, and they're contingent upon the grace of God. And this is what we see in Daniel. You didn't give God the credit. Remember that happened with Herod too. He didn't give God the credit, and then he got eaten by worms. And so that's probably the theological answer. Now, practically speaking, I would suggest, and C.S. Lewis talks about this in Mere Christianity, how pride is sort of the fountainhead of all other sins and shortcomings, that pride can become manifest as so many other issues, like mania, like I'm always looking over my shoulder. I think people are out to get me. It can be the cause of really self-loathing because, or a martyr complex. And nobody appreciates me for who I really, really am. It's an unwillingness to accept forgiveness because you're going to fix it yourself. I don't need you to forgive me. I'm going to make this right myself. Presumes that you have the capacity. You can probably, like all roads lead to Rome, you can probably talk this through with me sometime, Tom, but name a sin and I can probably show you the freeway that got you there from the root sin of pride. Uh-huh. And of course, this is something that as we navigate some of these passages about Satan in Isaiah and others, that it seems to be that this angel elevated himself and had this prideful heart and wanted to ascend to the place of the Most High, El Elyon, and that pride then led to this Pandora's box of other sins opening up in the world. So I would suggest if you can look at the other things in the world that you struggle with, your marriage, because you never want to say that you're wrong, or your situation at work, you feel entitled to a bigger salary. Those kind of things seem not to come from God or a centeredness on Christ, but a feeling that I deserve better because I am better. And that's something I think both Old and New Testaments would tell us you need to attend to quickly before that grows into something else.
That's helpful. It's where your focus is, huh? Yeah, on yourself or on God. Why is Daniel still relevant today?
Well, I think that the key issue for us in this moment, if you look at this in terms of a global, ages-long perspective, is we in our part of the world here, we're in the upper Midwest, are in a nation where we will drift away from being the majority and toward being a minority. It'll take a while. We're not like Western Europe or anything like that. But Daniel, I think, gives us a playbook how to live and navigate in a world where the people who perhaps make our laws or rule over us militarily do not share the same convictions that we do. So I think that's very important. I think that Daniel is relevant too for a second reason, and that's because of prayer. And we'll see this in upcoming editions of the Clash of Kingdoms series as well. But when they don't know what to do, they pray. When we don't know what to do, we whiteboard, we strategize. We don't turn it over to the Lord. So there's something about that. But then I think the third reason I would offer is Daniel has a lot to do with friendship. Just as a very practical application, we see the friendship that sustained Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah through this transition into the assimilation of the Babylonian kingdom. We see warm feelings between Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel. We'll see warm feelings between King Darius and Daniel as well. So there's something about when we're living in a world where not everyone shares our convictions, drawing strength from one another as well. So Daniel is a book about friendship too.
Even when we may not necessarily agree with them.
Yeah.
Because obviously Daniel couldn't agree with some of these men, their opinion, their philosophy, their worldview, and yet still had a relationship.
Well, in some sense, that's a measure of a friendship. The more like you someone is, the less it's really a loving friendship. The more they perhaps depart from your values or your norms, and you can stay hanging there with them, the more that shows me that's anchored in love and not just commonality or, you root for the same sports team. But because you have the depth of friendship, you're sacrificing having everyone agree with you for the sake of this connection with someone who maybe differs.
We probably don't root for the same team, but we're still friends, right?
You don't root for any teams, do you, Tom?
All right, going on. What?
The Winnipeg Jets. I don't know.
Aren't the Dolphins a hockey team?
Yeah.
No, I don't know. But be that as it may, what is coming up in Clash of Kingdoms?
Well, we have 3 messages remaining. This coming Sunday, Pastor Mark will talk to us about the well-known story of Daniel in the den of lions and his unwillingness to compromise on his prayer life and his relationship with the Lord of his life, and especially facing Jerusalem. So there'll be some interesting things on that. And then we're going to go into the second half of the book at your request, my dear friend Thomas, and not shying away from some of these peculiar visions. So I'll be back in the pulpit on the 19th looking at Daniel chapter 7. We skipped over the vision I alluded to earlier, which was Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue and the different kingdoms that are represented by the parts and the metals in that statue, because Daniel chapter 7 gives us the same story using a different allegory of these beasts and horns and things like that. But then it also gives us a look at this idea of the Son of Man, Ancient of Days kind of idea that becomes absolutely essential to Jesus' self-understanding. So we'll make some connections between that and Jesus when he refers to himself as the Son of Man, especially even when he's on trial. This seems to be his association with the Son of Man that infuriates the Sanhedrin to the point that they're ready to condemn him to death. And then we'll wrap up by looking at Daniel chapter 12, which is the conclusion of the book, where we have one of the very few references in the Old Testament to resurrection or allusions to this. And so we mentioned back on Easter Sunday morning how the book of Job may talk about this a little bit. I in my flesh shall see him. He'll stand on the earth. But I think Daniel chapter 12 probably is the single best allusion to resurrection of the body in the Old Testament. So we'll explore that on the 26th.
Look forward to that. You mentioned Son of Man, and I had read that was Jesus, one of his favorite references to himself. And for us, we just nod at that, but it did have a different impact to those folks back in New Testament times.
Right, and we can talk about this when we get there, but a lot of us are more comfortable talking about Jesus as the Son of God. And we actually, in our English language, in our contemporary perspective, have what would be the stronger claim, the blasphemous claim, reversed, because they believed that a lot of people could be considered sons of God. Kings were considered sons of God. But to call yourself the Son of Man, to us that sounds more innocuous. It's actually the one that fires people up all the more.
Look forward to that too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tim, very much. And we will keep in mind if we have more to ask, we'll send it on to you.
Yep. Tell me more at frcoc.org is the website, and we encourage questions to keep coming in. We love having these conversations.
Great.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.